The moonlight over Braavos was different than anywhere else Arya Stark had ever known. It had a cool, silver hue that cascaded onto the canals and painted the slender gondolas in ghostly outlines. Even after living there for months, the shimmer fascinated her. The city breathed mystery, so unlike the starkness of the north or the opulence of King's Landing. Sometimes when she walked the streets late at night, she fancied the moon itself was whispering to her, calling her home. But what home was left for Arya Stark, a girl who was trying to be no one? She stood on one of the stone bridges that spanned a narrow waterway and gazed into the gently flowing canal. Her reflection stared back, a young face turned lean from constant hunger, eyes dark and wide, scars of old injuries faint across her flesh. She remembered the time she had worn rags and had been forced to beg in these streets. She had chosen that path. She had embraced the discipline of the faceless men. She'd learned to feed herself on scraps, to listen more than she spoke, to endure pain in silence, to be cunning and as agile as a cat. Yet there was always that spark within her that threatened to betray her vow of selflessness, that vow requiring her to relinquish who she was. Time and time again, Jaqen H'ghar had reminded her that a girl was no one. But Arya felt the name Stark echo in her bones with every breath. She was Arya of Winterfell, the daughter of Ned Stark, and though she had declared a dozen times that she was done with that life, the memory of it remained like a stubborn ghost. It haunted her in dreams, Winterfell's courtyard blanketed in snow, the warm stable with the odor of fresh hay, needle in her hand as Jon Snow ruffled her hair. She thought she'd grown adept at silencing these memories, that her transformation into a faceless disciple was well underway, but the ghosts never truly left. That night, with the moon floating over the rooftops and the water lapping against the mossy stone, she tried to quell the ache within her. The House of Black and White was not a place for sentiment. She reminded herself of the kindly man's lessons. To serve the many-faced god, one must be unburdened by personal longing. Duty, sacrifice, transformation. These were the cornerstones of the new life she was building. She did not realize, as she walked back along the bridge, that each quiet footstep was leading her to a moment of irrevocable destiny. When she returned to the House of Black and White, the air inside felt cooler than usual, with the stench of death no stronger or weaker than on any other night. The large hall was quiet, the pillars looming like silent watchers. A single oil lamp glowed by the far wall, reflecting on the still pool in the center where the waters promised both release and transformation. Arya inhaled deeply. Every time she entered that hall, she thought of the people who came seeking the gift of death, the final mercy bestowed by the faceless men. She respected it in a way. It was a power that balanced the scales of suffering. She made her way through the darkness to the small room where she slept on a straw bed with a threadbare blanket. She did not fear the gloom or the silence. They were her companions now. But that night she dreamed. She dreamed of running through corridors of endless blackness, of hearing the pound of her own heart, of calling out in a voice that dissolved into echoes. She couldn't find her father. She couldn't find her mother. She couldn't find Robb or Sansa or Bran or Rickon. She was alone in a labyrinth of twisting halls, with the weirwood trees from the godwood blooming out of the floors, their red leaves dripping like blood. She turned and saw Jaqen H'ghar's face illuminated by torchlight. Then his face changed to the kindly man's, then the waif's, then her father's, then her own. By the time she woke, drenched in sweat, the first pale beams of dawn were seeping under the door. She rose to wash, splashing cold water on her face. She forced herself to calm her breathing. Nightmares were nothing new. She'd had them ever since she'd witnessed her father's beheading, maybe even before. Yet this one felt more potent, as though something old and deep was stirring inside her. She tried to push the images away, tried to focus on being no one. But she was not no one, not truly. Later that morning, the waif found her in the hall, kneeling by the edge of the pool where the dying came for solace. The waif's steps were almost silent on the black marble floor. Arya caught sight of her reflection again in the water, pale-faced, eyes like two chips of ice, with that unblinking stare that always put Arya on edge. When the waif spoke, her voice was subdued, devoid of inflection. A girl has not yet surrendered herself. Arya lifted her head. A girl tries but fails, the waif said, tilting her head slightly. Jaqen says a girl is still too much, Arya Stark. Arya bristled. The mention of her name in such a hollow way cut deeper than any blade. She remained silent, hoping that silence might hide her tumultuous heart. Come, the waif ordered, turning gracefully on a slippered foot. A girl must prove she is ready. Arya followed, stepping quickly to keep up. They traversed corridors that twisted deeper beneath the House of Black and White, the candlelit walls damp with the moisture that rose off underground channels. The darkness felt alive, a swirl of hidden shapes and whispers. At last, they came to a door of heavy oak, bound in iron, leading to a chamber Arya had never seen. The waif pushed it open, revealing a cramped room with a single flickering torch. Resting on a wooden table, there lay a pair of masks, carved and painted with strange expressions, one with a contorted smile, the other with a sorrowful frown. The waif turned to Arya. These are the faces for a new mission. A girl will choose one. A girl will go forth into the city. And a girl will not fail. Arya swallowed. She felt the weight of the words and also an undercurrent of threat. If she failed, the cost would be dear. She stepped closer to the table, examining the two faces. The smiling one reminded her vaguely of a street performer she'd seen near the moon pool. The sorrowful one bore the look of a mother in mourning. Both were lifelike in their details. She tentatively raised a hand over the sorrowful face. The waif's voice cut through the darkness. Has a girl decided? She nodded. Yes. She picked up the sorrowful face and felt it in her hand. The mask was light but rigid, and as she pressed it to her skin, an odd warmth spread across her cheeks. She felt a tingling as if the mask were adhering to her features, molding itself to the lines of her face. Through the eye slits, she saw the waif's pale countenance studying her. The waif nodded once. A girl will go to the painted pier and find a man called Morrow. He is a gambler, a cheat who prowls the piers for those he can swindle. He took a life once, an innocent child who had nothing to wager but hope. The girl shall deliver the gift. But first she must speak with him. She must gather knowledge. The many-faced god does not take lightly. Return only when the gift is delivered. Arya's heart thudded in her chest, but she inclined her head in a gesture of obedience. She thought about how this gambler, Morrow, might compare to the names on her old list. The many-faced god, or the god of death, had no partialities. He merely collected the souls, and the faceless men were his instruments. Arya tried to feel that sense of detachment they demanded of her, but the memory of being robbed of her own innocence, of losing her father, mother, and brother, stirred anger in her. She drew a breath, steadying herself. She reminded herself that this was a test. Without another word, she left the chamber. As she stepped back into the corridors, she felt a cold sweat prickling her skin. The sorrowful face was secured to her features, and she wondered how she might appear to anyone else. Soon, she reached the main hall and stepped out of the house of black and white into the blazing Braavosi daylight. The mask's subtle magic shifted her perspective. She sensed the air differently against her cheeks. She moved with the practiced ease of a street vendor's widow, stooped just so, her steps quiet in the hustle of the city. Each breath of the salt air reminded her that she was about to bring death to someone. She tried not to see it as murder. It was the work of the faceless men, a paid debt. Still, her heart pounded. She crossed the many bridges that wound through Braavos, passing taverns, forges, and the stalls of fishmongers. The painted pier was one of the liveliest places at this hour, sunlight dancing off bright murals, couples strolling hand in hand, street minstrels playing airy tunes. Through the throng, she spotted the gamblers. They formed small knots, men rolling dice on overturned crates or flipping coins with elaborate flourishes. She recalled how Jacqueline had taught her to see a target's habits, who he talked to, how he carried himself, what pockets he dipped his hands into. Morrow would stand out somehow, though she didn't yet know how. Keeping to the edges, she watched. She saw an older man in a crimson doublet shouting curses at a group who had apparently beaten him at his own game. She saw a young boy juggling knives to draw a crowd into placing bets on whether he would slip. She saw a middle-aged man with a hawk-like nose and a sly grin, leaning against a brightly painted pillar, carefully surveying passers-by. Something in his stance, in the way he seemed to scan the crowd for prey, told her that must be Morrow. She moved closer, adopting a timid gait, letting her shoulders slump. The man took notice of her. She could tell by the way his eyes flickered over her. And sure enough, he slid away from the pillar and approached her, his grin warm yet predatory. "Good day, my lady," he said, voice slick as eel oil. "You look lost. Might I be of some assistance?" The mask made her voice sound rougher, older. I am not lost, sir. But I have some coin, and I was told I might be entertained here. They said a gambler's trick is worth seeing." His grin widened. "Oh, indeed. Morrow's the finest gambler on the painted pier. If you want a fair game, there's no better place." Arya nearly snorted at the mention of fair game, but she caught herself. It wouldn't do to reveal her scorn. She let him lead her to a small table set by the water's edge, where a battered deck of cards lay. The sea breeze carried the stench of fish and bilge water. Morrow fanned the cards, letting them flutter. Would the lady like to play a round or two? She reached into the pouch at her belt, withdrew a few coins. Her mind tensed. She remembered all the lessons on reading subtle cues. Morrow's eyes flicked to her coin. His smile never faltered. She took a seat on the creaking stool across from him, setting the coins on the table. The game began. He dealt with practiced showmanship, flipping cards and weaving them in quick arcs through the air. Arya, feigning ignorance, reached clumsily for her hand. She noticed how deftly he manipulated the deck. The outcome was rigged before she even had a chance to play. She lost the first hand, then the second. Each time, Morrow's grin turned more ingratiating, and he insisted she stay. One more try, my lady. The tide can always change. Arya let it go on for several rounds, allowing him to take her measure, to guess that she was a widow or a lonely spinster with a handful of coins to waste. When she finally spoke, it was with feigned despair. I have little left, sir, but I am in need of a blessing. My son is ill, and the apothecary requires his fee. Morrow put on a show of sympathy. Truly I am sorry to hear that. Yet sometimes fortune's favor is found in the unlikeliest of places. He slid another card across the table. Double or nothing, dear lady? She placed her last coin in front of her. For a moment she felt that itch in her fingers, that old desire to brandish needle to take her justice directly. But that was not what the faceless men taught. You do not kill out of personal vendetta. You deliver the many-faced god's gift when it is duly paid for or fated. This was a mission, an orchestrated removal of a man whose crimes had condemned him. She let him deal another hand, and when she turned over her cards she feigned shock at how poor they were. Morrow smiled, revealing stained teeth. He laid down a winning set. Ah, fortune's wheel turns again, he announced, plucking her coin from the table. She sighed in mock disappointment, noticing how he tucked the coin away quickly. It seems I am truly undone, she mumbled in the gruff, sorrowful voice the mask gave her. I have nothing else left. Morrow surveyed her, perhaps weighing whether there was more he could take. Such is the nature of luck. One day you have it, the next it's gone. But do not despair, dear lady, there is always tomorrow. She stood, and with a trembling gesture that she hoped appeared genuine, she put her hand on his arm. Thank you for your kindness. She lifted her eyes to meet his. He gave a thin-lipped nod, but something flickered in his gaze, satisfaction, not kindness. Arya turned away and walked with measured steps, leaving him behind among the crowds of the painted pier. When she glanced back, she saw him already scanning the throng for a new mark. That evening, she walked the streets in the guise of a different face, a shapeless figure in tattered robes that allowed her to observe Morrow unseen. She watched him bait a new victim, a timid young man who claimed to be from Mir, in Braavos to trade spices. Morrow lost a few early hands, letting the lad think he had found an easy mark, then raised the stakes. Before long, coins and a silver-chased ring passed across the table into Morrow's possession. The younger man's face fell, and Morrow feigned sympathy yet again. She saw the same pattern repeated with a pair of gullible travelers. And so it went. From conversations in the alleyways and whispered gossip in smoky taverns, Arya learned Morrow's story. He had come from the Westerlands originally, a deserter from some local militia. He fled to Braavos, gambled his way into a small fortune, then lost most of it and turned to cheating to regain it. But more grievous than that, there were dark rumors that one of his marks, a girl who had tried to stand up for herself, was found dead in a canal with bruises around her throat. People who asked questions found themselves threatened. The House of Black and White must have received payment or prayer for his life to end, for the many-faced god hears all pleas. Now the duty fell on Arya. Late that night, she took lodging in a shabby inn, for she knew she might need to watch him longer. She could not risk returning to the temple without finishing the job. The inn's walls were thin, and she could hear drunken patrons stumbling in the halls, but she closed her eyes and pictured the men on her old list: Joffrey, Cersei, Walder Frey, Marentrant. They had tormented her mind in the past. Now there was Morrow. He was not on her list of personal vengeance, but he belonged on someone's list, and that was enough. No, she reminded herself, this is not about my list. This is the many-faced god's business. She lay awake for a long time, letting the method of his death take shape in her thoughts like a cold, creeping tide. The next day, she found him early at the painted pier, prowling for marks. He seemed hungover, a bit more belligerent as he jostled shoulders with other gamblers. She quietly approached him, still wearing her sorrowful face. He recognized her. My widow friend, he said, faking a courteous bow. What brings you back here? Arya lowered her head, letting the mask's illusory features twist with worry. I hope to speak with you, kind sir. I've come into a small inheritance. Nothing grand, but enough that I might try my hand once more. To see if luck has turned in my favor. Morrow's lips curled into a grin that reminded Arya of a fox spotting a wounded hen. Let's step away to a quieter place, shall we? He led her behind a storage warehouse near the pier where crates of dried fish and casks of cheap wine were stacked high. A flimsy table sat there, likely to keep them out of the city guard's sight. He laid out his deck. How about a few hands, dear lady? She nodded, pulling out a small handful of coins from the pouch she'd borrowed at the temple, a short advance for the mission. In truth, the money hardly mattered. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her. She knew the next step. The game was a mere formality. She dealt the first hand, slipping her gloved fingers over the cards. For a moment it was as though Sirio Farrell's voice echoed in her mind, quiet as a shadow. Quick as a snake. She swallowed hard, then turned up the corners of her cards. She let Morrow see her eyes widen in pretend surprise. Not a good hand? Morrow teased. She shook her head as if anxious, reaching for the meager coins. Perhaps I should fold? Morrow smirked. Don't be so quick to flee. Fortune can smile on even the unluckiest soul. Arya played along, waiting for her moment. The question was how to deliver the gift without drawing attention. She had a small vial of poison hidden beneath her sleeve, one that would induce a painless demise within hours. The mission did not require a spectacle. The many-faced god's ways were subtle. Yet something lingered in her, a restlessness, an anger that wanted to see justice done more directly. No, she told herself, that is not the way. The faceless men are mercy. This man's death should feel as gentle as a prayer. She let Morrow shuffle and deal again. He didn't notice when she slipped the small drop of poison into the cup of watered wine he had been sipping. He was too focused on the cards, on her fake tells, on the outcome of the game. It only took a moment. She stirred the cup slightly with her finger, all the while making a show of confusion over her cards. Finally, Morrow laid his hand down, triumphant, and reached for his wine. Arya had to bite her lip to keep from holding her breath as he took a long swig. His eyes narrowed, assessing the look on her face, but she maintained her sorrowful mask. He said, again, you are unlucky, my friend. If you'd like to continue, I'm not opposed to letting you wager future sums. After all, we can come to an arrangement. Arya stood. She saw the first flickers of confusion cross his features. His hand went to his stomach as if he felt a pang. Perhaps the poison was working. He looked up at her, frowning. Are you all right, dear lady? His tone held mock concern, but behind his eyes she could see his thoughts racing. She wanted to say something final like the prayer she used to recite Vala Morgulis, but she merely bowed her head. No words needed. This was the many-faced god's domain. She turned, her heart hammering, and walked away. Behind her, she could hear him cough. A slight, strangled sound that might have been a question or a plea. She kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if ghosts of her past weighed on her shoulders. If she turned to see him, if she watched him die, was that an act of Arya Stark, or an act of the faceless men? She did not look back. She vanished into the crowd, making her way to a quiet alley where she could remove the mask and breathe. The mission was complete. Yet as she slid the sorrowful face off, she felt none of the relief she expected. Instead, a chill washed over her. The face in her hands seemed to regard her with a silent reproach. She remembered the small, cold acts she'd seen within the temple, people slipping poison into a stranger's cup, carefully orchestrating accidents. All done in the name of the many-faced god. She wondered if that was truly so different from vengeance. She wondered if the lines were blurred. She cradled the mask for a moment, letting her heartbeat settle, and then tucked it safely away. She would return it to the house of black and white. That evening, she slipped back through the temple's heavy doors. The hall was dim, the hush profound. Jaqen Hagar stood near one of the tall black pillars, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Arya. She approached him, lowering her gaze. A girl has done what was asked, Arya said, her voice a whisper in the vast space. Jaqen's eyes were like dark pools. And does a girl feel triumph in this deed? She swallowed. A girl feels nothing. He studied her for a moment, perhaps weighing the tension in her shoulders or the flicker in her gaze. A girl lies. She tensed. It was always unnerving how easily he seemed to peer into her soul. She wondered if he suspected her doubts. But he merely turned away, dismissing her silently. She knew better than to speak further. She walked deeper into the temple, seeking a moment's respite in her chamber. Her footsteps echoed, and the hush of the place made her mind feel crowded with thoughts she dared not share. Could she truly abandon who she was for this path of shadows and masks? Days passed. Then a week. The waif said nothing about her mission. Jacqueline said nothing. Arya cleaned the temple floors, scrubbed the altars, listened to the dying who came seeking mercy. Sometimes she was sent to the canals to gather certain herbs that grew in hidden marshes near the edges of the city. Other times she disguised herself as a servant girl, eavesdropping on Braavos' wealthy patrons in upscale wine sinks. She learned to shape her voice, posture, mannerisms to each face she wore. She learned to shed identities like a snake sheds skin. But the dreams persisted, dreams of being Arya Stark of Winterfell, of a life that once was. Of her father's voice telling her to be strong. With each passing day, an unspoken tension grew between her and the waif. Maybe it had always been there. The waif seemed to sense every lingering piece of Arya's identity. In the training yard beneath the temple, they sparred with wooden staffs. Arya focused on the movements, recalling Farrell's teachings, the water dance, the grace and fluidity. And yet, whenever the waif swung her staff, Arya sensed a fury behind it that was more than simple training. The cracks of wood on wood echoed in the underground chamber, each blow leaving bruises. Arya fought back with all she had, but the waif was quick, pitiless. At the end of one session, Arya's ribs ached and her face stung from a blow that had knocked her down. Again, the waif commanded, her tone cold. Arya rose shakily. She tried to empty herself of emotion, focusing only on technique. But the waif advanced with impossible speed. Again, Arya's staff was batted aside. Again, she was sent sprawling. Pain flared through her hip. The waif stood over her, expression impassive, staff pointed at her throat. A girl is too slow. A girl's pride betrays her. Arya glared up at her, resisting the urge to curse. She swallowed. A girl is no one. She forced the words out as though repeating them would make them true. The waif lowered her staff. Not yet. Panting, Arya picked herself up, ignoring the hot rush of anger in her blood. Something in her wanted to challenge the waif, to prove her own skill. But the face of the many-faced god demanded humility, or so she'd been told. She bowed her head. Later that night, she limped to her chamber, a bruise blooming across her thigh. She realized that if the waif wanted her dead, she might find a way to deliver that outcome without raising suspicion. The House of Black and White was a place of secrets. One could vanish in a labyrinth of winding corridors, never to be seen again. She pressed her back to the cold stone wall, letting the ache in her body subside. The candle flame flickered in the stillness, sending dancing shadows across the floor. She tried to keep calm, tried to breathe. That was when Jacqueline appeared. Arya's heart jostled. She hadn't heard him approach. He seemed to materialize out of the darkness. A girl has fear in her eyes, he observed softly. Arya lifted her chin. A girl does not fear death. He studied her for a moment, his gaze fathomless. No one can lie to the many-faced god. A girl still clings to her name, to her old self. Arya took a breath, not knowing whether to deny it. I've done all that was asked. You have, he conceded. Yet the past weighs on your heart. You cannot hope to become no one if you cannot let Arya Stark die. She bristled. Is that truly the price? He offered no answer. Instead, he presented her with a small glass vial, the same as she had used on Morrow. Another mission has come. The many-faced god requires a life. A girl will go to a certain merchant in the fish market at daybreak tomorrow. He has been judged. A girl will deliver the gift. Arya stared at the vial in his palm, slender as a twig, the liquid inside an inky black. She felt a rising conflict in her chest. How many more times would she do this? How many more names would she add to her tally? She closed her hand around the vial, though, because refusal was not permitted. In the darkest hours before dawn, she rose from her restless sleep. Her bruise throbbed, but she had no time to nurse her pain. She went to the small storeroom where the faces were kept, selecting one that appeared drab and unmemorable, an older woman's countenance with strands of thinning gray hair. She affixed it to her features, letting the strange tingle wash over her. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the House of Black and White and into the muted glow of pre-dawn Braavos. The fish market was beginning to stir. Boats arrived bearing the night's catch, and vendors squabbled over prices, all while gulls cried overhead. She found the merchant in question, a rotund man with a booming voice who was barking orders at his workers. She observed him from afar, noting the tension in his brow, the sweat on his face. She saw how he berated a timid apprentice, slapping a crate from the boy's arms for being too slow. Arya approached his stall with a timid gait. "Good morning, my lord merchant," she said, voice altered to match her older visage. "May I have a look at your wares?" He scowled, but forced a customer's smile. "Of course. Choose quickly, though, I have no time for dithering." She pretended to examine a few fish, wrinkling her nose. "Is your product fresh?" This one smells quite ripe. He huffed. Braavos is best. If you don't like it, go elsewhere. Arya lowered her voice, feigning a conspiratorial tone. I may have some interest in a private sale. Something more exotic. I've heard a certain rumor that you deal in special goods. Spices from the East. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity brightening his face. I might, he said carefully. Who told you that? She shook her head. Does it matter? If you have what I seek, I can pay well. He cast a glance around to see if anyone was listening. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Wait here. I've got something in the back. He waved away his apprentice and ushered Arya behind the stall into a cramped storeroom, the air pungent with fish guts and rotting scales. He opened a crate revealing small pouches of colorful powders. Shirazar pepper from the Jade Sea, saffron from Volantis. He was naming them off, trying to gauge her interest. Arya made a show of leaning in. Yes, these look fine indeed. She slipped the poison vial from her sleeve. With one quick movement, she poured the black liquid over a particularly bright red powder. She hoped the merchant's confusion might mask her action. Oh dear, she said, acting startled. I'm sorry, I knocked something over. He leaned in to see what she had done. What did you, But she quickly stepped back. I'll still pay you for it, she offered, a hand raised as if to reassure him. Let me gather my coins from my belt. He reached down to inspect the powder. It had darkened only slightly, the poison soaking into the red spice. Arya forced herself to remain calm. She lifted her gaze and saw him pinch some of the powder between his fingers, sniffing at it to see if it was ruined. That was enough contact for the poison to begin its work. In a few hours, maybe less, if he handled it more, he would feel the first signs. The many-faced god would claim him quietly. No one would suspect the older woman with thinning gray hair. She pretended to find her coin, fumbling in a small pouch. I'm sorry, I think I left my money at home. I will come back. Without waiting for his reply, she hurried out of the storeroom. The merchant called after her, but she feigned embarrassment and continued walking. She disappeared into the crowd of morning shoppers, melding with the swirl of Braavosi life. Once out of sight, she exhaled shakily, swallowing the knot in her throat. Another life taken. Another mission done. When she returned to the temple later that morning, she reported her success to Jacqueline. He merely nodded and said nothing, his stoic face revealing no pride, no reproach. The next few days passed without incident. She tried to practice with the staff to swallow her frustration each time the waif bested her. But inside, a quiet storm gathered. She felt the sting of the House of Black and White's unyielding demands. She felt a longing for something she could no longer define: home, family, a sense of self. Every poison she administered was like a thread unraveling her soul. She found she could not meditate as the kindly man had taught her. She could not still the thoughts that roiled in her. Her final straw came without warning in the hush of a late evening when she was tending the temple's hall. She heard murmured voices near the pool. She saw the waif speaking in low tones with one of the acolytes, a person whose name Arya didn't know. A faint suspicion told her they were talking about her. She was right. She will fail again, the waif said. She cannot shed her identity. If she remains, it may bring trouble to all of us. Then she must be tested further, the acolyte responded, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous hall. The kindly man believes in her promise. Jacqueline, too. The waif's lips pressed into a thin line. Too much trouble. Arya stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding. She knew she was precariously perched between acceptance and rejection by the faceless men. She felt the old anger flare within her, remembering every time she had been dismissed, belittled, or left in confusion. She was tired of being a puppet. She was tired of lying awake, haunted by a name she was supposed to have shed. She pressed her fist to her chest, feeling her own heartbeat as if to reaffirm that she was Arya. She had tried to walk this path, but she had never truly left Winterfell behind. That night, she crept from her chamber with a small bag of belongings. She carried no face, for she would wear her own. She would leave the House of Black and White, perhaps stow away on a ship. Anything to find her own path again. She knew they would not let her go easily, but she had to try. She made her way through the maze of corridors, the flicker of torchlight casting shifting patterns on the walls. At every corner, she feared the waif or Jacqueline might appear to stop her. At last, she came to a narrow postern door that opened onto a side canal. She pushed it open, the night air cool and briny. She stepped out onto a small stone quay, her footsteps echoing. She set her bag down for a moment, turning to pull the door shut when she heard a voice behind her. A girl would leave without saying goodbye? She whirled around. The waif stood there, clad in dark leathers, her pale face expressionless. Arya's blood pounded in her ears. She reached for the hilt of the small knife tucked in her belt. The waif's eyes flicked to the blade. So, a girl thinks she can betray the many-faced god? Arya swallowed. I'm not betraying him. Words failed her. How could she explain the turmoil in her heart? The waif stepped forward, moving like a dancer, her posture poised. Arya knew from experience how deadly the waif's skill could be. You will never become no one. You cannot let go of your name. Arya's grip on her knife tightened. I don't want to be no one, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm Arya Stark of Winterfell. A flicker of scorn passed over the waif's features. Then this ends here. In one fluid motion, the waif lunged. Arya barely managed to sidestep, her reflexes honed by countless sparring sessions. The waif was quick though, and her leg swept out, knocking Arya off balance. Arya crashed against the quay wall, gasping at the pain that shot through her ribs. She scrambled to her feet, brandishing the knife. With a growl of effort, she swiped at the waif. The blow was deftly parried. They circled each other in the pale moonlight, the city's distant noises muted by the lapping of dark water. Arya tried to recall Syrio Farrell's lessons, swift, graceful, yet measured. She feinted left, tried to strike from the right. The waif twisted aside, delivering a sharp blow with the edge of her hand to Arya's wrist. The knife spun from Arya's grasp, clattering on the stones. Arya's pulse raced. She dove forward, trying to tackle the waif, but her opponent was too lithe. The waif pivoted, driving an elbow into Arya's side. Arya gasped, staggering back. Her eyes flickered to where her knife lay, but the waif stepped on it, pushing it aside with her foot. You are weak, the waif taunted softly. You always were. You cling to your illusions. Arya's nostrils flared. She tried to focus on an opening, on a moment to strike. The waif lunged again. Arya managed to block, but the force of the blow sent her stumbling. Stars danced across her vision. She recognized that she was outmatched. All her training, all her cunning, the water dance, the survival instincts, none of it seemed enough. Desperation rose in her chest. She was Arya Stark, she told herself. She was the direwolf's daughter. But the city did not care, nor did the waif. In a frantic attempt, she reached behind her for anything she could use. Her fingers closed around a loose cobblestone. She tried to swing it, but the waif ducked easily. Then came the blow she never saw, an open palm strike that caught Arya beneath the jaw, jarring her skull. She collapsed onto the quay. Her head rang. Her limbs felt sluggish. The waif pressed a knee into Arya's back, forcing her down. Arya struggled, gasping for air. You are nothing, the waif hissed. Not a faceless man, not a Stark, just a frightened child who kills from the shadows. Arya tried to twist, but her strength was failing. Her vision blurred. She felt a sudden coldness at her throat and realized the waif's knife was there. A ripple of panic cut through her. She remembered her father's execution, how she had been held back, helpless to stop it. Was this how it would end for her too, on a cold stone quay in Braavos, unremarkable and unseen? She felt the sting of the blade biting into her skin. A memory of her father's voice came to her then, and the dire wolf sigil, and the words, when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. She thought of Jon, of Sansa, Bran, Rickon. She wanted to see them again. She wanted to fight for them. She wanted to come home. Summoning the last of her resolve, she twisted beneath the waif, lashing out with her elbow at the woman's ribs. The waif grunted, her hold loosening for a split second. Arya threw her weight sideways, dislodging the waif's balance. She rolled, reaching for the waif's wrist to push the knife away. The blade scraped her throat, warm blood trickling down her neck. She felt a rush of agony but kept moving, ignoring the pain. For an instant, she gained the upper hand. But the waif was too skilled, too relentless. She spun her body, hooking Arya's leg with one of hers and flipped her onto her back again. The momentum knocked the breath out of Arya. She felt the quay's cold stone slam into her shoulder. Tears blurred her vision. The waif's face loomed above her, eyes alight with a grim finality. A single thrust of the blade and Arya's world exploded into searing pain. She gasped, feeling the iron tang of blood fill her mouth. The waif's face was a pale blur. She choked, the warm fluid saturating her tunic. The moon seemed to flicker overhead as if the city lights were winking out. In that moment, she felt a strange wave of calm, almost acceptance. She was Arya Stark, she had always been. And this was the end the city had chosen for her. Her body convulsed. She tried to speak, to move, but her limbs were heavy and numb. The waif released her, letting her slump against the stone. A distant part of Arya's mind registered that her heartbeat was slowing, that each breath was now a ragged gasp. Shadows encroached on her vision, swallowing the glimmer of water, the flicker of the moon, the silhouette of the waif. She tried to say her mother's name, or maybe her father's, but no sound emerged, only a wet rasp. In her final moments, fragments of memory rushed over her, Robb laughing, Sansa combing her hair, Bran climbing the walls of Winterfell, Rickon toddling after the dire wolves, her mother's soft touch, Ned's stern gaze melting into gentle pride. She thought of Jon, giving her needle and telling her to stick them with the pointy end. She wished she could see them all once more, even just in a dream. Then the wave of darkness swept her under. She exhaled one last ragged breath and the world went silent. In the city of Braavos, the news of a young body discovered at a deserted quay drew little attention. Death was common enough here, sailors drowning, street urchins succumbing to hunger, gamblers ending in a brawl. The city had its own hush about such matters, a near collective shrug. The face of the corpse had bled enough that it was nigh unrecognizable. The city watch found no coin or identification. They questioned a few bystanders, but none knew the girl's name. Some might have guessed she was a foreigner or a beggar from another district. She was laid out in the damp morning light, a silent testament to the shadows that lurked in the city's back alleys. A few who glimpsed the body later remarked on her dark hair and the bruises across her cheek. Others noticed a single small wound near her throat, a more grievous one in her abdomen. The watch carried her away to the temple where the unclaimed dead sometimes ended up. But the House of Black and White did not claim her. The men who brought her knocked at the door, left the body at the threshold, and walked away. In Braavos, the mysteries of the House of Black and White were not questioned. The corpse rested there, cold and alone. Inside, the waif informed Jaqen that the girl had been tested and failed. Jaqen simply nodded, his face as impassive as ever. Perhaps he felt a pang of regret, for he had seen potential in the girl. Perhaps not. The many-faced god receives all. The world outside kept spinning in the swirl of trade, taverns, and coins changing hands. Eventually, Arya Stark's body was given the same final rites as any other who came unclaimed. The priests performed their silent preparations guided by old ritual. There was no weeping, no farewell. She was, in their eyes, no one. But as her body lay on the cold slab, a single candle's flame danced. In that fragile blue light, there seemed to linger the faintest echo of who Arya Stark had been, daughter of Ned and Catelyn, sister to Robb, Sansa, Bran, and Rickon. The girl who had once prayed for vengeance, who yearned for home, who tried to erase herself in service of a god of death. The flame flickered, illuminating her still features. For just an instant, the curve of her lips resembled the old defiant glower she had worn when she faced foes in King's Landing, in Harrenhal, in so many other places. Then the candle guttered out and darkness reclaimed the chamber. The ripples of her death did not shake kingdoms, no armies marched. Far across the narrow sea, the snows fell upon the north and Winterfell stood in the hush of a looming war. Jon Snow knew only that Arya was missing. He would never learn of her end in Braavos, only that she had vanished off the face of the world. Sansa, in her trials, would not receive news either. They would each carry a silent hope that she might yet be alive. They did not know that she had wandered too close to the void of anonymity and had been swallowed by it. In Braavos, the gulls wheeled overhead and the tides lapped the city's ancient stones. Life went on indifferent. The painted pier remained crowded with gamblers, minstrels, and fools. New scoundrels rose to replace the old, and new travelers arrived each day, brimming with stories. At the House of Black and White, the silent hall welcomed petitioners seeking the gift. Faces were chosen, names were cast aside, and in the gloom, the priests and acolytes continued their quiet work. Jaqen moved through the corridors like a phantom, offering cryptic words. The waif executed her tasks with cold precision, unchallenged in her devotion. Another novice might come along, seeking to become no one, never knowing a ghost named Arya Stark had taken that path and perished. Yet the sea has its secrets, and the wind sometimes carries whispers. In the labyrinth of Braavos, a few street urchins whispered rumors of a fight by the quay. Some insisted they had seen a deadly brawl in the moonlight, a slender figure locked in combat with a pale-faced woman. But no one could confirm it. Rumors in Braavos rose and fell like tides. Arya's story became just one more ghostly murmur, too insubstantial to latch onto. A swirl of hearsay quickly drowned by the next day's gossip, a nobleman's scandal, a foreign ship sinking, a performer's grand act. But somewhere, deep in the recesses of the House of Black and White, an acolyte lit a candle one night, paused as though remembering something. A name unspoken but not entirely forgotten. The flame flickered, revealing a swirl of dust motes in the air. Then the acolyte, too, turned away, returning to the slow, steady business of preparing the next face, the next cup of poison, the next quiet arrangement of fate. And in a distant place where the old gods watched through the eyes of ancient weirwoods, perhaps a faint sigh passed through the rustling leaves, lamenting a wolf pup lost across the sea. The The branches swayed, red leaves shimmering as if in silent farewell to the child who had once chased cats in Winterfell's courtyard, who had longed to dance with a wooden sword, who had worn a secret name across the sea and met her end alone. If the old gods mourned her, they did so in quiet ways, known only to the wind and the whisper of leaves in the snow. Some said that not all was lost. Legends in the north sometimes grow around the missing and the dead. Stories that a fierce, dark-haired girl roamed the wild, that her spirit had become a wolf that prowled the forests at night, howling for the pack she would never see. Or that she walked the halls of death itself, unseen but watchful, carrying vengeance on her slender shoulders. Storytellers spun these tales in smoky and corners where travelers with a penchant for the dramatic might exchange a few coins to hear of the wolf girl who vanished. But no one ever came forward with proof. No reunion occurred. No righteous wrath descended upon the waif or the faceless men. The many-faced god's domain was final. Thus ended Arya Stark, a child of the north, in the labyrinthine city of Braavos. Her destiny severed by a single moment of violence. She had sought to become no one, but until her final breath she remained stubbornly Arya, the name that clung to her like a scar. She had delivered the gift of death to others, but in the end that same gift circled back to claim her. Perhaps that was fitting in a twisted sense of cosmic balance. The House of Black and White could not abide a disciple who refused to surrender her heart's truth. And yet, in that stark finality, one might find a kind of tragic valor. She died as Arya Stark, never truly bending her will to become no one. However brief her final stand, it was her own choice in those moonlit moments on the quay to fight for her name, for her identity, even if it meant facing the end. And though the darkness swallowed her, she remained, in that last heartbeat, the wolf girl from Winterfell. Perhaps the gods took note of that. Perhaps, in some hidden corner of the afterlife, a father's spirit opened his arms to welcome her, calling her by name. Perhaps the ghosts of her mother and brothers reached out across the void, bridging the gap that war and tragedy had created. Such comforts are known only in the realm beyond mortal eyes. In the living world, her story passed into whispers. The city's canals carried on, reflecting the shimmering stars. Braavos remained a crucible of secrets and half-truths. The temple of the many-faced god stood as ever, its doors open to those who sought an end or a new beginning. Travelers might pause there, marveling at the ominous statues and the silent priests, never guessing how a young girl once walked among them, fighting to bury her name. Over time, the few who had known her face, like the street children, the old fishwives, the occasional gambler, forgot the details. Even the ship captains who once ferried her across the sea might not recall the quiet passenger with haunted eyes. Such was the way of the world. The tides rose and fell, and with them memories washed away. But in some fleeting hush between dusk and dawn, if one stood at that lonely quay where a nameless body had been found, one might feel a chill in the air, as though an unseen presence lingered. A presence caught between the identity she could not discard and the anonymity she could not embrace. That presence was Arya Stark's last echo, the final testament to a life of struggle, courage, and defiance, cut short by the very path she chose. And if the night wind carried that echo to the distant coasts of Westeros, perhaps, in the ear of the right dreamer, it might sound almost like the whisper of a name. Arya. A name that still belonged to her, even when death had claimed her body. For in the end, she was never no one, but forever a wolf of Winterfell. The waif's knife had found its mark, and so, on a lonely quay in Braavos, Arya Stark's final breath slipped away. She died in the place where she had once hoped to shed every fragment of her past life. The House of Black and White accepted her back into its halls in silence, her body left unclaimed by the city watch. To the priests, to the acolytes, she became another vessel returned to the many-faced god. In their eyes, she was no different from the beggars, the terminally ill, or the forlorn souls who crossed that threshold. Yet in the shadows of the temple, there lingered a complex hush, as though the ancient stones remembered that this had not been a simple petition to the god of death. She had been one of them, or almost so, and the abruptness of her ending resonated in quiet corners no sunlight could reach. That same night, after the body was brought inside, the waif returned to her own spare chamber, cleaned the blade, and removed her vest of leathers. She felt no triumph. Her face was as smooth and cold as ever, but behind her eyes a series of thoughts flickered. The swirl of the moonlight on the quay, the surprising vigor of the girl's last struggle, and that final rattling gasp. She had wanted the girl gone for a long while, had felt a rising dissatisfaction each time Jacqueline or the kindly man said a word in Arya's favor. Yet to see the matter concluded gave her no thrill of pride. It was only the end of a test that Arya had failed. A cycle of apprenticeship snapped short. She thought of telling Jacqueline that the deed was done, but that would be unnecessary. Jacqueline Hagar knew. He always knew. She had sensed his presence afterward, not physically. She had not seen him, but in the intangible hush that surrounded her steps as she carried Arya's limp body from the quay with the help of a silent acolyte. The waif sat on the edge of her straw cot, removing her boots, each movement deliberate. Her entire life had been spent mastering subtlety, erasing the lines of her identity until she was only devotion. She recalled the times she and Arya had sparred with wooden staffs, how the girl refused to yield, bruised and battered yet defiant. That memory lingered, momentarily pricking her mind. Then she steadied herself and let it go, letting the well-practiced emptiness fill her. A girl was no one, and no one did not grieve or rejoice. The House of Black and White existed for a single purpose, to serve the many-faced god. Outside, the canals of Braavos glimmered with faint starlight. Gondoliers occasionally plied the waters, but the city seemed asleep, an expanse of silent courtyards, leaning towers, and lonely arches. Yet the rumor of blood sometimes stirred even the darkest corners. On that night, a few sleepless souls claimed they had heard a cry by the side canal, something abrupt and desperate. Yet city dwellers knew better than to press their ears too close to the lethal mysteries of Braavos. One old fisherman, drawing his nets, saw two figures carrying a third along the quay, but he only shook his head and kept to his business. The next day, no one approached him with questions and no watchman demanded his story. Braavos swallowed events quickly. In the morning, the body was gone from the threshold. The House of Black and White gave no accounts. Yet behind its solemn doors, Arya's remains were handled the same as all the unclaimed dead, carefully cleansed, divested of her worldly garments, and prepared for the quiet rituals that readied a corpse for the crypt-like recesses beneath the temple. The priests did not speak her name. She had claimed she was no one. By their estimation, that was all that needed saying. They lit a candle. They washed her hair. They placed her on a slab of cold stone, arms folded over her chest. No final prayers for House Stark, no recollection of the wolves or of Winterfell, only the discreet hush of mercy and oblivion that the many-faced god provided to all. When the waif passed through the corridor where Arya's body lay, she allowed herself a single glance. She saw the pale skin, the tangled dark hair. She noticed the bruises on the neck, the lethal puncture wound in the abdomen. Part of her remembered how, at first, she had misunderstood the girl. She had thought Arya was just another lost child from Westeros, easy to break. Then she discovered the steel in Arya's spirit, the fierce defiance that had kept her alive through so many hardships. But that defiance had led her to cling to her name. Now it was over. Satisfied that no flicker of life remained, the waif continued on her way, her footfalls echoing quietly against the stone. The city outside soon found another story to latch onto: a wealthy merchant's downfall, a flamboyant carnival barge drifting into the harbor, rumors of political upheaval in the distant lands of Westeros. If word spread that a nameless young girl had turned up dead, it found no lasting foothold in the minds of Braavos' citizens. The city thrived on spectacle, on gold, on trade. A single life, easily forgotten. The painted pier bustled once more with gamblers, fortune-tellers, and buskers. The local Braavos practiced swordplay at dawn, courting fame with their flamboyant duels. No one paused to recall that the same girl who had once loitered among the gamblers or disguised herself as a beggar now lay cold and unmoving in the depths of the House of Black and White. Within that temple, routine continued. People came at sunrise, some in tears, others in trembling resignation, seeking the gift for their own reasons: terminal illness, heartbreak, despair. The priests offered them the dark waters from the temple's central pool. In the hush that followed, the waif and the acolytes carried out the bodies and prepared the next set of faces for the infinite complexities of the faceless men's illusions. One face among the many, that of Arya Stark, would never hang in the temple's hidden hall. She had never completed her metamorphosis. She had been neither holy disciple nor holy supplicant, and so, ironically, she was given only the same unceremonious passage as those unknown who came to die on the cold stone. Yet Jacqueline Hagar still remembered. In the days following, he roamed the temple's silent chambers, sometimes pausing before an alcove where a single candle burned. He did not speak of Arya, not to the waif, not to the kindly man, not to the novices who scrubbed the floors. But at moments his gaze would flicker with some unspoken reflection, as if he recalled a different time and a different name. One might guess that he felt regret. Or perhaps it was merely the faceless men's deep acceptance of the final weaving of fate. Whatever the truth, Jacquin said nothing and performed his duties as calmly as ever, meeting with certain wealthy Braavosi or secretive travelers who came to negotiate a special death. Life and death, balanced on a coin's edge, continued as always. Far across the sea, in Westeros, no raven brought news of Arya Stark's demise. No outriders galloped to Winterfell to deliver the tidings. The North remained embroiled in its own struggles, scattered and battered by wars. Jon Snow, at the Wall, faced daily challenges, managing the Night's Watch, forging uneasy alliances, confronting the creeping cold that heralded unnatural threats. In his quiet moments, he sometimes thought of Arya, the little sister he remembered teaching to hold a sword properly. She'd been so proud of her needlework, the steel kind, not the sewing. If he had known of her death, it might have crushed something in him that was already battered by the losses of the war, but the news never came. He carried on with only the memory of her bright gray eyes and that fiery determination that once made him promise to train her in secret. Meanwhile, Sansa Stark, navigating her own perils under the guardianship of Littlefinger or within hidden strongholds of the North, allowed herself a single naive hope that Arya might still be alive somewhere, forging her own path. If Sansa had heard any rumor from across the narrow sea, she would have seized on it, sending riders or letters to Braavos or beyond. But no rumor ever reached her ears, only half-truths and the swirling chaos of her own precarious position. She, like Jon, clung to the possibility that Arya might reappear, just as once Bran and Rickon had vanished under dire circumstances, only for rumors of their survival to flicker here and there. The tapestry of Westeros was thick with falsehoods. It was easier to believe in a rumor of Arya's survival than to accept her silent death. Time rolled on. A fortnight passed, then a month. In Braavos, the priests eventually removed Arya's body from the slab. 2 novices carried it into the labyrinth beneath the temple's foundations. There it joined the countless others given to the many-faced god. No stone marked her resting place, no ceremony named her. She became another lost soul in the city of canals and illusions. The novices lit torches that flickered in the damp subterranean air, their footfalls echoing on the winding steps. Neither spoke as they placed the corpse in a small niche sealed with a stone that had no inscription. In that moment, if the old gods of the North watched through some intangible vantage, they might have rustled a sigh in the lonely boughs of an ancient weirwood. But in Braavos only a hush remained. The waif, in her calm way, had presumed that all recollections of Arya would fade like water draining from a cracked vessel. She resumed her tasks with a renewed diligence, collecting rumors from the painted pier, administering poisons when the contracts demanded it, and sparring with novices who learned to fear her swiftness and cruelty. If she ever reflected on the night of Arya's death, no sign of it crossed her face. She did not spare a second glance for the novices who sometimes whispered that the waif had killed someone from within their own ranks. For them it was a cautionary tale: do not fail the many-faced god, do not cling to old names, do not disobey. But death can sow peculiar seeds. Sometimes in the stillness of night, the waif dreamed. She saw the shape of a wolf in the twisting corridors beneath the temple. She heard footsteps racing through an empty labyrinth, and she heard her own voice ring out, "A girl must die." Then she awakened with a start, slick with sweat, though she always forced herself back to composure. In the morning, her staff struck harder against novices as if to chase away the phantoms of a dream she refused to believe could trouble her. When she glimpsed Jacquin in the hall, she sometimes felt his gaze on her, measuring as if he guessed that specters haunted her. She bristled inwardly, maintaining her posture of absolute loyalty. If part of her sought to prove she was beyond all feeling, so be it. The House of Black and White required that discipline. Elsewhere in Braavos, a boy named Ricasso, who survived by fishing coins from the canals and selling them back to gamblers too drunk to notice they had dropped them, claimed to have seen the dead girl in his dreams. He was a scrawny child, no older than 10, with a shock of curly hair. He often loitered near the painted pier, rummaging for scraps or filching fruit from inattentive vendors. One evening, as he dozed in a corner by a shipping warehouse, he jerked awake, certain he had heard a girl's voice say, "I am Arya Stark." The next morning, he said nothing of it for fear of sounding mad. But the dream returned the following night, accompanied by a swirl of images: a lithe figure crossing a stone bridge, a needle-like sword glinting in the sun, the cry of a wolf. Ricasso, spooked by the intensity of these dreams, whispered his fears to an old woman who sometimes shared her crust of bread with him. She told him he was likely possessed by a canal phantom. Braavos was full of ghosts, after all. To the old woman's dismay, the boy insisted that he recognized the face in his dream. She had short, dark hair, fierce eyes, and something about her felt so real. But the old woman merely patted his arm and dismissed him. Everyone in Braavos had nightmares, she said. Try not to think about it. Yet Ricasso could not help it. On a whim, he asked around, inquiring if anyone had seen a dark-haired Westerosi girl recently. Some shrugged. Some laughed at him. Others recalled they had once heard rumors of a slight girl with a water dancer's stance, but that was old news. The details were fuzzy. The painted pier had no shortage of faces that came and went. In time, the boy decided there was no sense in pursuing the dream's meaning. It offered neither money nor food, so he shoved the thought aside and returned to his daily scrounging. Yet the dream continued to visit him sporadically, and each time he woke with a sense of helpless grief, as if he were mourning a friend he had never met. Life might have gone on that way indefinitely, with Arya's memory subsiding into the city's undercurrents, had it not been for a certain Braavosi courtesan named Ilario. Ilario was no ordinary courtesan. He was known for his connections to the merchant guilds as well as certain noble families in Westeros who sometimes fled across the sea. He traded secrets as adroitly as he traded flirtations. On a late summer evening, after entertaining a wealthy Lyseni trader in his private parlor, Ilario heard an intriguing snippet of information. The trader mentioned that some high-born Westerosi were seeking word of Ned Stark's missing daughter. Supposedly, they were offering a substantial sum for any clue of her whereabouts. Ilario pricked up his ears. Coin glinted in his mind. He pressed for details. The Lyseni trader shrugged. I know not much more. Rumor is the girl vanished, possibly abducted. The family hopes she's alive but will pay to confirm a death if need be. War and tragedy, you know how it is in Westeros. One can never keep track of which child belongs where. Ilario took that rumor and let it simmer. He recalled that some time ago a street performer had gossiped about a young Westerosi who'd come to Braavos to train with the water dancers, or so the story went. He also recalled that a certain crowd of children near the painted pier had once muttered about a girl who claimed she was nobody yet spoke the common tongue with a northern accent. Put these threads together and the result intrigued him. The missing daughter of Ned Stark was rumored to be named Arya. If such a girl had died in Braavos, someone might be eager to confirm her fate and pay well for the knowledge. Ilario enjoyed the swirl of secrets, the interplay of rumor and wealth. He decided to do a bit of subtle investigating. His first move was to approach the City Watch discreetly. He asked if any unknown Westerosi girls had turned up dead in the last 6 months. The watch captain he spoke to, a broad-chested man named Darimio, rubbed his beard thoughtfully and said, "We find bodies from time to time, you know that. But maybe I recall one. A slight female, dark hair, found near a side canal. There was precious little to identify her." The House of Black and White accepted the body. Ilario's interest sharpened. The watch captain demanded a bribe to share more details, and Ilario, with a melodious laugh, offered a small purse of silver. Darimio then confirmed that the City Watch had discovered the body only weeks ago. There had been signs of a fight, but no witness ever came forward to claim knowledge. Ilario thanked him with a charming smile, left the watch barracks, and let his imagination roam. Could that body have been Arya Stark? If so, how would one prove it? The House of Black and White was notoriously secretive, not prone to entertaining visitors who asked intrusive questions. But Ilario had a gift for persuasion. He considered paying a novice's bribe, but that was a dangerous path. The faceless men might consider it an affront. Another tactic formed in his mind. He could approach certain unscrupulous individuals who skirted the edges of the temple, gather tidings from the outskirts. That was safer than knocking at the temple's own door. He began by reaching out to a half-blind fisherman who moored his boat near the House of Black and White. The fisherman, named Gatto, scratched his wiry beard and admitted he had seen a figure carrying a slender body late one night. "I didn't pay it much mind. People bring their dead there, right? But I remember thinking the body looked small, like a child. The one carrying her had a slight build, too, might have been a woman." Ilario pressed him for more, but Gatto only shrugged. "It's Braavos. Death is not so uncommon." Though he learned little, Ilario was cunning enough to connect the fisherman's recollection with the watch captain's mention of a canal fight. It seemed that some scuffle had ended in the girl's demise, and the body had been taken to the temple. The question was, how to confirm her identity? Even if he confirmed it, how to convince a Westerosi sponsor that this truly was Ned Stark's missing daughter? He considered forging a letter or conjuring a piece of distinctive clothing. That might earn him coin, but if the truth unraveled, the payback could be harsh. Ilario was not a fool. He dealt in real secrets, or at least cunning illusions that could pass muster under scrutiny. Around this time, a rumor flitted through the back alleys that the House of Black and White had lost an acolyte. Ilario's ears perked up. The rumor stated a young Westerosi aspirant had died. The rumor was hushed, possibly suppressed by the temple's aura of fear and mystery, but the notion that a Westerosi girl might have trained there only to lose her life fit perfectly into the puzzle swirling in Ilario's mind. If that was Arya Stark, then the story of her disappearance, mysterious training with the Faceless Men, sounded plausible enough. She was known to be willful, rebellious, and nowhere to be found in the Seven Kingdoms. Ilario wondered if he could glean some small item belonging to her from within that temple. Seizing the opportunity, Ilario tried an approach. He dispatched a small runner boy to deliver a respectful letter to the temple's door, requesting an audience with Jaqen Hagar or another priest. The boy returned pale-faced, stammering that the door had opened only a crack, a single hand had emerged, and the letter was snatched away. The boy had received no reply. Ilario smiled wryly at that. The House of Black and White was not known for courtesy in the normal sense. He waited a week, then two. No response came. Nonetheless, Ilario's curiosity had been kindled. He ventured to a candlelit tavern near the temple known as the Ebony Eel. Occasionally, novices or lesser acolytes might pass through there for a quiet drink or a clandestine meeting. Ilario lingered, wearing plain, unobtrusive garments. At a corner table, he nursed watered wine, letting the swirl of conversation pass around him until he heard mention of the temple. He perked up, eavesdropping on a pair of rough-spoken men. Their clothes indicated some menial labor in or around the temple, maybe dock workers who delivered supplies. They were inebriated, their tongues loosened by cheap liquor. One man said, "So the waif came by the other night, asked for a small crate of lye. Don't know what they do with so much lye, do I? But the temple always pays on time." The other nodded. Heard a rumor they lost one of their own. A Westerosi. Little slip of a thing who thought to join them. Not so wise, I'd say. Ilario's pulse quickened. He pretended to shift in his seat, inching closer. The first man squinted as if recalling a detail. A girl, was it? Well, they've plenty of faces in that place. Strangers come, strangers go. But from what I gleaned, the girl died in some scuffle. Not an old, peaceful death. Just the sort of end you'd expect for someone messing in the house's secrets. Ilario caught a glimmer of caution in the second man's expression. Don't talk so loud. I don't want them hearing we've been gossiping. They have ears everywhere. Ba scoffed the first. I'm no fool. Still, best keep it to ourselves. They lapsed into a quieter conversation and Ilario dared not approach them. He sensed how dangerous it would be to pry more directly. He had all but confirmed his suspicion. The Westerosi girl who perished under the temple's domain was Arya Stark. But how to prove it? Ilario considered forging a plan to slip into the temple at night. That notion alone sent shivers through him. The Faceless Men were not trifled with. For all he knew, the moment he set foot uninvited inside their domain, he would vanish. He had heard enough stories of proud Braavos or cunning thieves who tried to test the temple's wards, never to emerge again. Ilario might be ambitious, but he was no fool. He began to wonder if there was another way, some physical sign or relic that might have belonged to Arya, something that a family member in Westeros would recognize. A distinctive sword, perhaps? People spoke of Arya carrying a blade named Needle. But if the rumors were true, Needle was left behind or lost at some point. Ilario had never seen any sign of such a sword. Even if it existed, it would almost certainly be under the temple's control if the girl had carried it. Perhaps they had melted it down or given it to some other nefarious purpose. Another route might be to bribe someone deeply connected within the temple, but the risk was monumental. The price in coin would be staggering and the chance of betrayal high. Despite these obstacles, Ilario refused to let the matter drop. The coin to be made from delivering this news to certain powerful parties, be it the Lannisters or the remaining Starks themselves or even Peter Baelish, could be immense. Someone somewhere would pay a fortune to know what really happened to Arya Stark, especially if Ilario could bring them evidence. The trick was not to get himself killed in the process. He weighed each option carefully, measuring danger against potential reward. Meanwhile, the House of Black and White carried on. Jaqen accepted new contracts, the waif administered them with chilling efficiency, and novices came and went in the unending cycle of service to the many-faced god. One novice, a timid boy from the Westerlands, caught glimpses of the waif's occasional nightmares. He slept in a chamber not far from hers and heard her stir in the night, sometimes uttering faint exclamations as if in distress. He wondered if the talk of a murdered acolyte was more complicated than people assumed. But fear kept him silent. In that temple, it was safer to keep your head bowed and your lips sealed. One morning, the waif was assigned to fetch a certain herb from the outskirts of Braavos. She donned a plain cloak and set out by foot, preferring to walk rather than hire a boat. The day was bright, sunlight glancing off the broad canal. She passed the painted pier, ignoring the swirl of gamblers and hawkers. As she threaded into a narrower street, she spotted a pair of city watchmen striding in her direction. For reasons she could not name, she felt a flicker of apprehension. But they passed her by without even a glance. That was how it usually went. She moved unnoticed. Yet something in her chest felt unsettled, recalling the night she had left Arya's body near the canal, the watchers nowhere to be seen. She had expected them to appear sooner or to ask questions. They never did. She carried on to a small orchard that grew near the edge of the city. There, tucked beside a marshy inlet, grew a cluster of herbs used in the temple's drafts. She knelt among the tall grass, her slender fingers carefully plucking the leaves. A gull cried overhead. She thought she heard footsteps. Instantly alert, she set down her bundle and rose, scanning the orchard's perimeter. Sunlight fell through the branches of fruit trees, and at first she saw no one. Then, beyond a crooked trunk, a young boy stood, eyes wide. He wore ragged breeches, a patched tunic, and had the curious look of someone who recognized her. The waif felt a cold surge of caution. Did she know this child? He looked about 10 or 11, scrawny as a starved cat. She stared back, her expression unreadable. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then turned and ran. She let him go, deciding it mattered not. He was just a street urchin, or so it seemed. The waif collected the rest of the herbs and began her return. Yet something lingered in her mind like a prickle of memory. That boy's eyes had flicked to her, startled and possibly afraid. The waif told herself it was nothing. Even so, she walked a bit faster, a slight tension in her posture. The orchard's hush felt suddenly ominous. That boy was Ricasso. He had recognized the pale-faced woman from his dream, though not entirely. He recalled a dark figure overshadowing a smaller one. He wasn't certain it was the same person, but he had seen enough flickers in his nightmares to guess this might be the figure who had taken the girl's life. Overcome by a rush of fear and confusion, he had fled. He made his way back into the winding streets of Braavos, breathless, heart-pounding. Over the next few days, he tried to puzzle out what to do with this knowledge. He was just a child living by petty theft. If this woman was connected to the House of Black and White, confronting her or telling the watch would be suicide. Yet the dream pressed on him like a burden. He felt the memory of that girl's voice, whispering a name, Arya Stark, and it haunted him. He confided in no one but an older boy named Strato, a petty pickpocket who sometimes let Ricasso sleep under the same awning. Strato snorted at first, dismissing the dream. But as Ricasso described the orchard, the woman's pale face, the hush of that final confrontation in the dream, Strato's eyes narrowed. You might be tangling with the faceless men, he said. That's deadly business, lad. Best keep your mouth shut before they carve out your tongue. Ricasso nodded reluctantly. He didn't want trouble. Yet a restless part of him felt compelled to do something. If the dream was real, then the girl was truly dead and this woman was the killer. The question was why Ricasso kept dreaming of her. Was it the ghost of this Arya? Did the ghost want vengeance? He had heard stories of ghosts haunting those who died unjustly, especially in a city like Braavos where so many tragedies lurked just beneath the surface. Ricasso tried to banish these thoughts, telling himself that it was madness. Yet the dreams persisted, and each morning he woke with tears drying on his cheeks. He did not know the cause. One evening, half-driven by an inexplicable urge, Ricasso crept to the House of Black and White. He lingered near the entrance, hidden behind a low wall. He dared not knock, but he tried to peer at the temple's door. The black and white doors loomed, carved with solemn faces. No sign indicated movement from within. The child caught a whiff of incense, or perhaps the stench of old death. He shivered. The canal beyond reflected slivers of moonlight. He wondered if Arya's spirit might be wandering that very canal, unable to rest. Fear overcame him. He fled back to his usual haunt in the Painted Pier district. Meanwhile, Ilario the courtesan had pursued his own investigations and reached a tentative plan. He would gather enough pieces of rumor to craft a credible story, then quietly approach an intermediary in Westeros. Perhaps a merchant who traveled between King's Landing and Braavos could deliver a letter to Peter Baelish or to some Lannister agent stating that Arya Stark had died under certain circumstances. But such a letter would lack any real proof. Ilario wanted a tangible item or a sworn witness. Sworn witnesses were impossible when dealing with the faceless men. That left items. If only he could procure something belonging to the girl. He tried one last gambit. He sent an anonymous note to the House of Black and White, carefully worded, offering a significant sum in exchange for a single relic from the dead Westerosi acolyte. No personal name was mentioned, but the intent was clear. He sealed the note with an inconspicuous wax stamp and paid a different runner boy to deliver it. 2 days passed with no response. On the third morning, Ilario found a small scrap of paper slid under the door of his modest Braavosi apartment. It read simply, "Do not ask again." The message bore no signature, no seal. Ilario's heart skipped a beat. He realized the faceless men were well aware of his interest and that if he persisted he might be found floating face down in a canal. That, at last, convinced him to halt any further direct approaches. He cherished his life too much to risk it on a single scheme, no matter how profitable. Even so, illusions die hard in a city that thrives on secrets. Ilario tried to stifle his curiosity, telling himself to leave well enough alone. He busied himself with entertaining wealthy travelers, exchanging gossip for coin. But each night, as he reclined on silk cushions, sipping spiced wine, his mind wandered back to the rumor. If only he could find some ephemeral piece of proof. If only. Time advanced, though. Braavos shifted into a new season, storms rolling in across the lagoon, drenching the city with relentless rain. The painted pier became a swirling mess of wet boards and acrid fish stench. Folks huddled under awnings, water dripping from carved gargoyles overhead. In the temple, novices mopped the floors endlessly, for the dampness seeped under doors and made the black marble slick. The waif remained as dedicated as ever, her eyes colder than the autumn storms. She executed her tasks, studied new poison techniques, and overcame every novice in the training yard. Occasionally, her dreams still came, but she tried to quell them by punishing her body with grueling exercises until she sank into exhausted sleep. Jaqen Hagar observed from a distance. His unreadable face gave no sign of displeasure or favor. It was only once, in a corridor lit by a single torch, that he spoke to the waif privately, so softly it was almost a breath of air. He said, "Does a girl still dream of the one she killed?" She froze at his words. In the flicker of torchlight, her expression wavered. "No," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "A girl does not dream." He studied her eyes as if searching for cracks in her composure. Then, with a faint tilt of his head, he said, "A lie." He turned and walked away, leaving her with the hush of footsteps echoing behind him. She stood there, stiff and silent, feeling a raw surge of something, anger, shame, or perhaps resentment that he could read her so easily. She was supposed to be above such petty emotions. She was supposed to be no one. Yet the memory of that night would not be extinguished. But the waif did not falter in her outward duties. Days continued into weeks. The temple served new petitioners seeking the gift. Some of them were travelers from Westeros, men and women afflicted by war or heartbreak, each with their own story. The novices watched them come, guided them to the pool, and eventually carried out the bodies. The House of Black and White existed in its own sphere of quiet inevitability. One stormy evening, as the temple's front doors remained shut against the lashing rain, a single figure approached on foot, water dripping from a sodden cloak. The figure rapped on the door. The watchful presence behind the door might have recognized that it was no ordinary beggar. The cloak, though wet, was of fine make, trimmed with subtle embroidery. After a pause, the door opened a crack and the robed silhouette of an acolyte peered out. A brief exchange, hushed by the downpour, followed. The acolyte allowed the visitor inside. In the gloom of the entry hall, the visitor threw back the hood, revealing a woman of patrician bearing, her dark hair arranged in an elegant style now half ruined by the rain. She introduced herself simply as Lady Belnora of Lys. She had come seeking a boon from the many-faced god. Her voice trembled slightly, not from cold but from dread. She claimed she desired the gift for her husband, who was suffering a slow, agonizing illness. But as Jaqen Hagar emerged from the shadows to greet her, he studied her with those deep, watchful eyes, and perhaps he sensed there was more. The temple had a way of peeling back facades. The woman repeated her request in a husky whisper, tears shining in her eyes, insisting that her husband begged for release. Jaqen listened, then guided her deeper into the temple, vanishing Ram's sight. What the novices did not see, what even the waif did not witness, was that once alone with Jaqen, Lady Belnora asked a different question. She said, voice trembling, "I have heard a rumor that your temple once harbored a Westerosi girl. A girl who might have been Arya Stark." Jaqen's face remained a statue. "The many-faced god takes countless supplicants. We do not keep a ledger of their names." She was not a supplicant, but an acolyte, the woman pressed quietly. "Word travels among the ranks of Lyseni traders, and so it came to my ears. The child of House Stark was said to have vanished. Some believe she fled across the narrow sea, that she might have come here. Is she alive? Jacqueline's eyes flickered in the torchlight. All men must die, he intoned softly. If she came seeking the faceless men, she would have no name. Lady Belnora nodded, swallowing. But if she is dead, might there be some trinket, something that could be returned to her kin in Westeros? I do not come here idly. My husband's cousin is rumored to be allied with certain northern interests, and there are those who would pay a handsome sum for anything that once belonged to Arya Stark. I was asked to inquire discreetly. Silence settled between them. Jacqueline regarded her with an unfathomable gaze. Perhaps he recalled the flash of Arya's fierce eyes, the resolute posture of her small frame. He recalled how she used to stand in the hall, trembling with exhaustion but never losing that grit. Then he said, the many-faced god asks for the gift. He does not deal in souvenirs. Lady Belnora flinched. I do not mean to offend. And yet you do, Jacqueline said gently. Return to Lys, my lady. Tend to your husband's suffering if that is your true cause. The House of Black and White does not peddle the remains of those who come to us. His words were polite, but steel threaded his tone. Lady Belnora visibly quailed. She bowed her head, murmuring apologies, and asked if the gift could indeed be granted to her husband. Jackie nodded. For the right price, the temple could administer mercy. That was their trade, after all. But as for Arya Stark, there would be no morsel of evidence, no trophy to confirm or deny her fate. After she left that night, hurrying back through the rain, the waif emerged from a corridor. She watched Jacqueline standing by one of the tall black pillars. He said nothing, but she felt his attention shift toward her. She knew better than to ask about the visitor. Yet curiosity gnawed her. The rumors of the Westerosi girl clearly had not died. People still came seeking. It amazed her that, even in death, Arya Stark's presence lingered like a half-faded echo. She turned away, moving like a wraith toward her own chamber. Outside, storms abated. A new wave of travelers arrived in Braavos, including hedge knights and courtiers from Westeros, some exiled for political reasons, others seeking gold or patronage among the city's affluent families. Tavern gossip churned, half-truths mingling with illusions. A pair of northern men appeared at the Purple Harbor Inn making discreet inquiries about a missing Stark girl. They had the look of Sells-Words, battered but determined. They approached fishmongers, dockworkers, even a few gamblers at the Painted Pier, asking if a girl named Arya Stark had been seen. Most shrugged or offered vague answers. A few recalled seeing a short, slim figure with dark hair who spoke the common tongue. But that was months ago. The girl had vanished. The Sells-Words pressed on. They shared a rumor that they worked for a northern lord who wished to find his late liege's daughter. Or at least confirm her fate. Money changed hands. Hints of the House of Black and White arose. One gambler told them he'd heard the girl became a beggar in the city only to be recruited by the faceless men. Another insisted she had stowed away on a ship bound for Pentos. Conflicting stories flew about, none conclusive. The men's frustration mounted, but they kept searching. Eventually, they turned their attention to the House of Black and White. But every local they asked recoiled from the suggestion of pressing that temple for answers. The Sells-Words argued among themselves. One advocated for barging in with swords, but the other, older and wiser, reminded him that to challenge the faceless men was a fool's errand. They compromised on a stealthy approach, lurking near the temple, trying to intercept anyone going in or out who might be bribed. For 2 nights they waited, huddled in a watery alley drenched by drizzle. They saw no novices come or go. Only once did they glimpse a slender figure in a dark cloak slip out near midnight, vanishing into the city's labyrinth. They did not follow, uncertain if it was wise to chase a faceless man in the dark. Through all this, the memory of Arya hovered like a restless phantom. So many wanted to know her fate. Yet the waif who had ended that fate spoke not a word. Each day, she felt an ever-deepening conviction that her own identity was unraveling. She had done her duty, but the deed refused to settle cleanly. Sometimes, in the temple's quiet, she caught a reflection of herself in the dark waters of the pool and thought she saw Arya's eyes gazing back. She blinked, and it was only her imagination. She tried to tell herself it was a test of the many-faced god, that if she could not banish these illusions, she was unworthy. Thus she redoubled her training, forcing novices into more brutal sparring, mastering each nuance of disguise and infiltration that the temple taught. She served as a living example of the cost of failing the faceless men's discipline. In that sense, she was exemplary. A perfect, pitiless vessel for the many-faced god. Or so she strove to appear. Late one night, as storms battered the city once more, the waif found herself creeping through the temple's corridors, heading toward the crypt-like recesses where bodies were stored. Something about the gloom beckoned her as if she might find release from her haunting dreams there. She carried a small lantern, the flame guttering in the drafty air. She passed row upon row of sealed niches, each containing the remains of those unclaimed or given to the faceless men. The stone floor was cold beneath her slippers. She told herself she was only conducting an inspection. But a quiet voice in her head knew better. She was searching, though for what, she could not say. Eventually, she reached a particular niche unmarked, sealed with a slab. Her lantern light fell upon the edges of the stone, revealing no chisel marks or inscriptions. The waif set down the lantern, placed her palms against the slab, and felt a faint tremor in her limbs. If she pushed it aside, she might see the remains. She had no illusions that they would be recognizable. It had been weeks, months. Decay would have rendered that once fierce face into something unidentifiable. And yet she felt compelled to confirm that Arya Stark was indeed gone. A sick swirl of dread coiled in her gut. She pressed, straining with all her might. The slab budged a fraction, letting out a stale breath of cold air. A rank smell drifted out, the odor of old death. She retched quietly, her eyes watering. For a moment she nearly abandoned the effort. But she gathered her nerve and pushed again, shifting the slab just enough to shine the lantern inside. The gloom revealed a wrinkled shape wrapped in linen bandages, the shadows uncertain. She thought she saw a glimpse of dark hair, half-rotted, but at once she felt a wave of revulsion. This was the end of Arya Stark, if indeed the body was hers. The waif's hand shook. The lantern's flame flickered across the half-shrouded figure. She let the slab slide back into place, her breath coming faster. She realized her forehead was damp with sweat. She saw no conclusive evidence, only the putrefying shape of someone who had once been a girl. That was enough. The finality struck her. Arya was truly dead, and there was no bringing her back. She turned, unsteady, and made her way out of the crypt. The corridors seemed to close in around her. She told herself this was justice, the rightful outcome for a disciple who had clung to her name. But part of her felt as if some unspoken wrong had been done. Why that notion tormented her, she could not say. Some nights later, Jaqen summoned her and said there was a new contract. The waif listened, head bowed, as he described a merchant from Pentos who owed a debt of blood. The House of Black and White had been paid lavishly by an influential magister to end the merchant's life discreetly. The waif was to track him, choose the face, deliver the poison. Simple enough. She gave a nod of assent, her voice level. Jaqen's gaze lingered on her for a moment. "Does a girl still dream?" he asked in that soft, haunting way. No, the waif lied again with measured calm. He offered her a small, carved box containing 2 flasks. "Choose wisely," he said. "And remember, a servant of the many-faced god must carry no baggage." She inclined her head and took the box. As she turned to leave, she could feel his gaze like a weight on her back, as if he knew the turbulence she fought to hide. But the House of Black and White did not abide confessions of guilt or sorrow. She would do her duty. She would vanish into the city, deliver the gift, then return. That was the way of things. She went forth into Braavos, adopting the face of a plain-faced woman in simple clothes, her hair wrapped in a headscarf. The merchant from Pentos was rumored to dine at an upscale tavern near the Sea Lord's palace. She found him easily, a rotund man in lavish robes, surrounded by cronies who laughed too loud and clinked cups of spiced wine. She took a seat nearby, pretending to be a traveler from the Jade Sea. She ordered a cup of cheap wine. No one noticed her slip a few drops of poison into a pitcher destined for the merchant's table. The raucous crowd was too busy in their revelry. When the merchant finally lifted his cup, the waif felt her heart beating in that familiar quick rhythm that always accompanied a kill. She waited, eyes on him. He drank. The night wore on. Eventually, he rose to leave, oblivious to his impending doom. In a few hours, he would collapse in painful spasms, though the temple's poison ensured he would not last long. She paid her bill, slipped out into the misty streets, satisfied that the mission was complete. Yet as she walked away, she felt no sense of triumph. Instead, her stomach churned. The echo of Arya's face hovered in her mind, as if the ghost were following her. Each kill reminding her of the night she had ended the girl's life by that canal. She forced herself to focus on her steps. The cobblestones glistened with recent rain, reflecting the red lamps hanging from the tavern eaves. A swirl of revelers poured out behind her, oblivious. She lowered her gaze, heading toward a small bridge that crossed a narrow canal. Suddenly, she felt a presence at her back. She turned, seeing a shape move in the shadows. Her hand inched toward the hidden dagger at her waist. But the shape retreated, footsteps echoing in a nearby alley. She tensed, suspecting a footpad or a spy. Then all fell quiet. She resumed walking, her nerves on edge. She whispered to herself that she was the waif, a faceless disciple, fearless in the face of danger. Still, a creeping sense of being watched clung to her. Through alleyways, she hurried, determined to return to the temple. She half expected to see that boy from the orchard jump out, or the two sellswords who had been making inquiries. But the streets remained empty. Only the wind muttered across the watery thoroughfares. When she reached the house of black and white, she slipped inside, chest heaving with tension. She realized she was shaking. Furious at herself, she set the carved box down on a table in the corridor. Then she retreated to her chamber, trying to quiet the tumult in her mind. She reminded herself that the mission had succeeded. The merchant from Pentos was as good as dead. All that remained was to wait for confirmation. In her chamber's dimness, she sank onto the straw mattress, exhaustion pulling at her. But sleep did not come easily, and when it did, the nightmares returned. Across the city, the rumors persisted. Now that more Westerosi travelers roamed Braavos, the name Arya Stark appeared more often in tavern banter. Some scoffed that she was a myth, that the real Arya Stark had perished at the Red Wedding. Others insisted she had been glimpsed in the city's squares. A few drunken Braavos claimed to have dueled her. Each story twisted into the next, burying the plain truth that she had died quietly under the shadow of the House of Black and White. The sellswords kept searching for a time, but found no leads. They argued about forcibly confronting the temple and decided it would be suicide. Eventually, they gave up and booked passage on a ship back to Westeros, intending to offer the uncertain tidings. We found no living girl, only rumors of a dead one. Their northern patron would not be pleased, but there was little else they could do. Seasons shifted again. The wards of Braavos began preparing for winter, though winter in the lagoon city was far gentler than in the north. Ships still came and went, forging watery paths through the channels. The painted pier dressed itself in new colors to lure travelers despite the chill. The Ebony Eel Tavern, near the House of Black and White, still served watery ale, but the lamplight within glowed warmer against the darkening days. The waif continued her routine, a silent pillar of the temple's discipline. She noticed fewer novices arriving, but that was typical in colder months. She continued to dream, though she told no one. One day, near twilight, she found Jaqen in the main hall, kneeling by the edge of the black pool. A new petitioner had come, a feeble old man ready to embrace the gift, and Jaqen was preparing the man in hushed tones. When Jaqen finished, he rose and turned to see the waif standing there. The old man stooped to sip from the pool, tears in his eyes, and the waif felt that quiet hush of finality. Jaqen signaled for her to leave the hall with him. She followed him into a side passage, the walls lit by guttering torches. The hush enveloped them. He said, "A certain man has arrived in Braavos, seeking knowledge of a Westerosi girl. He claims to be an envoy from Winterfell, though Winterfell is not what it was." The waif's breath hitched. A girl thought the matter had ended. Matters rarely end so tidily. The name Arya Stark still draws curiosity, from east to west. The House of Black and White does not share its secrets. She nodded once, carefully schooling her expression. "Does he come here, to the temple?" "He soon will, or so we are told. The question is whether the House of Black and White sees any threat in this man." The waif considered. "Do we remove him as well?" Jaqen studied her. "The many-faced god is not a petty assassin. We do not kill for trifles. If he brings no contract, if no one pays for his end, we do not meddle. But the faceless men guard their mysteries. Should he pry too deep, you must see that he finds only silence." She bowed her head in assent. A coil of tension formed in her gut again. Another Westerosi seeking Arya. Another chance that the truth might surface. But she forced calm, reminding herself that she was no one. She would do what she must to protect the temple's secrets. Sure enough, 3 days later, a tall man in a worn cloak arrived at the Ebony Eel Tavern asking for directions to the House of Black and White. The locals gave him wary looks but pointed him onward. The man's accent betrayed northern roots, though his clothes were patched and dusty from travel. He introduced himself to a few bystanders as Morgan Ruttiger, a retainer of House Manderley, come to Braavos to investigate business dealings, yet in private he confided that he also sought news of Ned Stark's youngest daughter. His face was lined with fatigue as if he had scoured half the free cities for this rumor with no success. He carried a short sword at his side, though he did not appear to be a fighter by trade. Perhaps he was a steward or a herald. At twilight, Morgan Ruttiger approached the House of Black and White. Light rain misted the air, turning the canal water pearlescent under a sky of clouds. He stood before the looming doors of Black and White. An unlit torch bracket clung to the wall, and two statues, weathered by centuries, gazed down with blind stares. He tried the doors. They did not yield. He rapped timidly, his heart pounding. Silence. He knocked again, more firmly. After a pause, the door creaked open an inch. A robed figure stood in the gloom. Morgan could not see a face, only the dim shape of a cowl. Greetings, Morgan ventured. I come from the north. I wish to speak with whomever leads this temple, if such a thing is possible. No reply came. The robed figure did not move. Morgan swallowed. I bring no threat, only a question. It said that a young Westerosi girl might have been sheltered here. Arya Stark, daughter of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell. If that is true, I humbly request any knowledge you can spare about her fate. I am authorized to pay gold for any information. Still no response. Morgan, gathering his nerve, said, My lord in White Harbor wishes to know if the girl yet lives or if she has perished. If any personal item of hers remains, we will offer a fair price. I beg you, if you have any humanity. The door began to shut. Morgan pressed his palm against it, more desperate. Please. I will do anything. She's a northern girl, lost in the city of strangers. If you turned her away or if she died, say so. Let us bury her properly in the crypts of Winterfell, where she belongs. But the figure behind the door pushed with calm finality. Despite Morgan's attempt, the door forced him back, then sealed. He hammered on it again, calling out, Wait. Please. Listen to me. Only silence answered. At last, drained and frustrated, Morgan slumped against the door, the misting rain soaking his shoulders. He cursed softly, turning away. He had no illusions about the power of the faceless men. If they wished him gone, they would find a way. He resolved to try again the next day, but in his heart he suspected it would be fruitless. Unseen by Morgan, the waif stood behind the door, her hand on its inner bolt. She listened to his pleas and heard the earnest quaver in his voice. Something in those words, bury her in Winterfell where she belongs, punctured a small corner of her facade. For an instant, she felt the weight of what she had done. She had robbed Arya of that chance, that final dignity of returning home. Had the girl ever hoped for that, or had she cast aside her name wholeheartedly? The waif remembered how, in Arya's final breath, she had seen something in the girl's eyes that spoke of longing and heartbreak, not the emptiness of a perfect disciple. She closed her eyes, fighting off the wave of doubt. No. This is the way it had to be. The many-faced god does not care for earthly customs of burial or legacy. Morgan Ruttiger remained in Braavos for another fortnight, lodging in a cheap inn, daily pacing the narrow street by the temple's entrance, always turned away. The watch eventually told him there was no point in lingering. The House of Black and White would not speak to him. They welcomed only those who sought the gift of death or those paying for a contract. Morgan refused to seek the gift, and he had no contract to offer. Exasperated, he tried bribing the city watch for help, but they laughed him off. A few nights he lingered near the Ebony Eel, hoping to catch an acolyte or a novice off guard. None appeared. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, Morgan stood by the canal's edge, gazing at the temple's silhouette. A swirl of gulls circled overhead, crying raucously. He felt defeated. His lord had entrusted him with this mission, believing that with patience or cunning, Morgan might glean the truth. But the House of Black and White remained a fortress of silence. Other leads had turned cold. He had nowhere else to go. As he wrestled with his conscience, whether to remain or depart, he noticed a figure approach. Slender, cloaked, the face obscured by the drizzle. Morgan tensed, hand on the hilt of his short sword, uncertain whether this was a threat. The figure halted a few paces from him. A quiet voice, distinctly female, spoke in the common tongue, though with a slight Braavosi accent. You search for the girl from Winterfell. Morgan nodded warily. Yes. Do you know anything? For the love of the gods, if you do, The figure cut him off with a gesture. Not here. If you wish to speak, go to the second arch by the mooring bridge after sunset. Come alone. Before Morgan could respond, the figure turned and vanished into the swirling rain, footsteps echoing softly on the wet stone. He almost called out, but caution stopped him. He recognized the potential trap in these words. Yet if there was a chance it could yield real information, how could he refuse? His heart pounded. He waited there another few minutes, straining to see if the figure might reappear, but the street was empty. Finally, with the hush of the canal around him, he retreated to his inn to plan. Night fell, the sky overcast. Morgan Rutt-Tiger slipped from his lodgings, wearing a dark cloak, his sword belted discreetly. He found the mooring bridge, an old stone crossing that led to a cluster of warehouses. The second arch was a narrow passage beneath the main thoroughfare, often used by black market traders for surreptitious dealings. He lingered there, the murky water below lapping at the piers. Torchlight from the far side cast a faint orange glow. The wind carried a briny scent, and Morgan's nerves were taut, suspecting an ambush. After a time, the cloaked figure emerged from behind a pillar. Morgan glimpsed the pale outline of a face, though not well enough to discern features. The voice came again, low and guarded. You want the truth about Arya Stark. The truth is, she came to Braavos. She died here. Morgan felt as if a spike had been driven through his heart. He had braced himself for this possibility, but to hear it so plainly jolted him. How do you know? Who are you? The figure hesitated. I am someone who once crossed paths with her. Cannot reveal more, but I can tell you that she did not die of sickness or starvation. She was killed. Morgan's breath caught. Killed by whom? Why? The figure's hood shifted as though in regret. She was involved with those she should not have challenged. If you continue to pry, you may meet the same fate. Morgan took a step forward. But what became of her remains? Let me at least bring her bones back to Winterfell if that's possible. She deserves a proper rest among her ancestors. A gust of wind carried a sliver of silence. Then the figure spoke again, voice tight with tension. Her remains are beyond your reach. You will find no trace of her in Braavos. The House of Black and White has claimed her. Let that be enough. Return to your master. Tell them she is dead, that she found no peace here. That is all. He clenched his fists, anguish coursing through him. I cannot just go back with words alone. They'll ask for proof. There is none. Frustration roiled within Morgan. Then how can they believe me? She's gone, the figure repeated softly. If your master doubts you, that is no concern of the many-faced god. Go home. Morgan stared at the cloaked form, anger and despair twisting in him. Who are you truly? Did you kill her? The figure drew back, the tension in the posture sharpened. Do not ask things that would doom you. I have told you all that can be told. Before Morgan could press further, the figure turned, swift as a phantom, and glided out of the archway. He lunged to follow, but a sudden swirl of shadows enveloped him. His foot slipped on the wet stones, nearly sending him tumbling into the canal. By the time he righted himself, the figure was gone, swallowed by the labyrinth of Braavos. He stood panting, the wind cutting through his soaked cloak. Deep down, he knew he had spoken to an agent of the House of Black and White, perhaps even Arya's killer. His mind reeled with a mix of rage, fear, and heartbreak. She was truly gone then. Murdered. No remains, no relic. Only a hushed confession in the watery gloom of a foreign city. In the days that followed, Morgan Rutt-Tiger tried in vain to glimpse that cloaked figure again. He wandered the mooring bridge, the ebony eel, the painted pier, half hoping for another encounter. None came. Exhausted and low on funds, he finally secured passage on a trading galley bound for White Harbor. He would have to return and speak to those who had sent him. He would say that Arya Stark was dead, that the House of Black and White had taken her, that there was no body left to retrieve. It was a meager, tragic conclusion to a long, fruitless search. Yet he could see no other recourse. In his final hours in Braavos, he walked the wharves with heavy steps, gloom settling over him like a cloud. At the gangplank, he turned to stare at the city one last time. The Titan's silhouette loomed in the distance, and the watery labyrinth glistened under the faint sun. He muttered a quiet farewell to Arya Stark, though he had never known her. Then he boarded the ship, and Braavos receded behind him. The cloaked figure, of course, had been the waif. For days, her conscience had gnawed at her. She knew she was not supposed to feed rumors or confirm any detail about temple matters. Yet seeing Morgan Rudiger's desperation had stirred something she could not fully suppress. She had given him the truth, albeit in the barest form, and perhaps it would bring some measure of closure to the north. She told herself it was not pity, only a means of preventing his further inquiries. A warning. If he had persisted, the temple might have ordered his end. In that sense, she had saved him. And that, ironically, felt like a minor penance for Arya's blood on her hands. Still, guilt did not sit comfortably with a faceless disciple. She tried to cast it away, reaffirming her devotion to the many-faced God. But the next time she knelt to pray in the temple hall, her mind wandered to the final look in Arya's eyes. Was it acceptance, or was it heartbreak? She could not be certain. Words slowly trickled across the narrow sea. By the time Morgan reached White Harbor and reported to his lord, the winter winds were blowing and the seas rough. The lord listened in grim silence, then said he would relay the tidings to those loyal to the memory of House Stark. Perhaps, in time, the knowledge would reach Jon Snow or Sansa or any other surviving kin. Yet with the endless turmoil in Westeros, the exact manner of Arya's death remained overshadowed by new battles, political upheavals, and the creeping horrors rumored beyond the wall. History often left little space for the tragedy of a lone girl lost in a foreign land. Still, an echo of her memory found subtle ways to endure. In the remotest corners of the north, a rumor circulated that Arya had indeed gone across the sea and died a nameless death. Some said she had joined a sect of assassins, others said she fell prey to slavers or pirates. None could say for sure. And in Braavos, from time to time a child might dream of a dark-haired girl whispering her name by the moonlit canals. Or a gambler at the painted pier might recall the fleeting glimpse of that fierce, watchful gaze. Yet the city continued, as it always did, swallowing tales in a swirl of commerce and illusions. The House of Black and White never spoke of Arya Stark again. The novices who had known her face, who had heard her Western accent, either advanced in the temple's ranks or perished in the harsh trials. Jaqen H'ghar continued to preside over the flow of deaths, unflappable and calm. The waif rose in skill and cunning, carrying out her tasks with an efficiency that made some novices fear her. Now and then she would sense a flicker of presence in the hall's shadows as if Arya's spirit lingered, but she always dismissed it as folly. In truth, the girl was gone. Only the memory remained, an unfinished chord in the waif's otherwise meticulously composed life. As the winter deepened in the north, as lords and knights clashed in their mortal struggles, Arya's story faded to the periphery. Perhaps only a handful of hearts truly mourned her, carrying the wound of her absence. Sansa, isolated in her own predicament, may have felt a pang of sorrow each time a rumor of Arya reached her ears, never confirmed. Bran, wherever he wandered in the throes of strange magic and old gods, might have glimpsed a flicker of her fate in green dreams, but if so, it never emerged into the realm of men. Jon Snow, embattled with the endless night at the wall, drifted to sleep sometimes with a fleeting recollection of Arya's tomboy grin, uncertain if she lived or died, hoping against hope that she might someday appear. But that day never came. For Arya Stark's mortal remains, bound in bandages beneath the House of Black and White, disintegrated slowly in the hush of the crypt. The brine-laden air of Braavos did its work. Bones turned brittle. Hair decayed. The linen wrappings grew stiff with time. No one came to remove them, to bear them to Winterfell's ancient crypts. No vigil was held. She had passed beyond. Yet in the cosmic tapestry of gods, old and new, many-faced or otherwise, perhaps her spirit found a path, or perhaps she returned to the wolf dreams she once knew as a warging child. Such mysteries are not for mortal minds to solve. Braavos wore its mask of commerce and intrigue, carrying forth as if nothing had changed. The painted pier glowed with lanterns. The Sea Lord's palace hosted masked balls. Gondoliers sang haunting tunes through the canals. In some corner, an urchin might whisper of a ghost girl who prowled at night. In another, a group of rowdy sailors might claim that the legendary Arya Stark would soon appear with a band of deadly assassins. But they were only stories. The living city neither honored nor condemned the dead who failed to leave a mark. Yet there was a subtle legacy left behind. Each contract the waif fulfilled, each name she struck from the ledger of life, came with a faint, nagging sting. She remembered how Arya had once tried to balance vengeance with service, how the girl's old list of names had guided her across the war-torn landscape of Westeros. In Arya's final moments, the conflict between who she was and who she tried to become had proved fatal. Sometimes, as the waif executed yet another contract for the many-faced god, she wondered if she too would one day be undone by the shards of her own buried identity. But the waif would not speak of these doubts. Silence was safety. Silence was devotion. She grew older, and the lines of her face sharpened. Her skills became legend among the novices. She killed swiftly without flourish, leaving behind no trace. She wore many faces, traveled to other free cities on quiet missions, returned each time to Braavos. The House of Black and White recognized her as a fearsome disciple, one who had fully embraced the void of self. If ever the kindly man or Jacqueline looked at her with the suspicion that she still carried some secret wound, they did not say so. Years might pass, the wars in Westeros might rise and fall, and still the waif would be there, silent as a grave, unstoppable as a final breath. Yet perhaps, in the stillness of her lonely nights, she would recall a pair of gray eyes and a skinny girl's fierce grin. She would recall the hush of the canal and the blood on her hands. If she let herself dwell on it long enough, she might even feel the faint ache of regret, a sorrow for something lost that she could never reclaim. Then she would push it away, clinging to her duty. But inside that fortress of discipline, a tiny fragment of memory burned like a cinder, reminding her that the dead are never truly gone, so long as they are remembered by the living, even if only in secret. And so Arya Stark remained a ghost in Braavos, a name seldom uttered, a fate seldom acknowledged, but never fully erased. Her end, abrupt and uncelebrated, mingled with the city's labyrinth of hidden stories. No bard composed a lament for her. No septon lit candles in her honor. But sometimes, under a moonlit sky, the wind rippled across the water in the deserted canals near the House of Black and White, and it sounded almost like a solitary voice whispering a single name, Arya, before dying away into silence. If the waif happened to hear it, she would close her eyes and remember that a girl was never no one. Not truly, for her name still resonated like an unanswered call across the darkness.